Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today we begin our Unified Minds deck analysis, and where better to start than the poster boys themselves, Mewtwo&Mew Tag Team GX. It was the highest rated Pokemon in the entire set review by the community and myself. So let's jump straight into this card and the archetype and why we think it's going to be such a strong contender. Starting off with the basic concept. As we know, Mew and Mewtwo has that fantastic ability that allows it to use the attacks of Pokemon that are either on your side of the board, like on your bench, or in your discard pile. This means that we can react to all sorts of situations and have a plethora of attackers in here to make life awkward for the opponent or just do big damage output, whichever one works best for us in the situation. That's the whole reason why Mewtwo is so strong. You get to react to your opponent's board and create the best game plan against whatever they're trying to do against you. And you have just such great versatility that you can react to different situations. We're going to try it with the Welder engine first off. I believe this is the strongest because Welder's just the best acceleration we have, really. Obviously, Malamar's comparable, and the psychic attachments themselves could help out with offering Mew and Mewtwo its own GX attack as an option, for example. But I think overall, Welder's just very simple. You get additional card draw as well as easy energy acceleration. And we also have Reshiram as a backup attacking option. If, for example, your opponent is playing Power Plants or something like that, or if they're a Psychic attacking deck, you can try and just go down the Reshiram route as if you were just a regular old Reshiram list, and hope that that can help you through these awkward matchups. So let's jump into the Pokemon. There's a lot to digest here. You can see the entire top line of GX Pokemon, the 5 individual GXs. These are going to be the things that are in the deck simply for this perfection ability of Mew and Mewtwo. It's a 270 hit point Psychic type, of course. Perfection's that ability that I was mentioning. You can use the attacks of Pokemon GX or EX on your bench or in your discard pile. So part of the sort of mini quest with this deck is not only helping yourself get set up, but at the same time trying to dig out these additional GXs that you can see on the top of the screen, and just get rid of them at different points, be it through Acro Bikes, Hapus, Giant Furnace can be another way that you can do that. So yeah, plenty of options for discarding these. So whenever you see them in your hand, you have options to get rid of them. And if they're in the deck, of course, there's plenty of ways to get rid of them also. So that's the whole intention around this list. You can see we have one-offs of all of these guys. I'll run through quickly why we use each of them. Altaria mainly for its first attack. It says that you prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from Pokemon GX and EX. So if you're up against opposing one-hit KO, tag team decks or something like Ultra Necrozma or something like that, you can try and use this Bright Tone attack to just simply say, you can't hit into my Mew and Mewtwo, you have to gust around him, or you have to use non-GXs, which is cool. The Detective Pikachu Greninja is an interesting one. He actually has the ability Elusive Master, which means that in some very niche situations, you could actually get him into play. If you have no cards in your hand other than him, you get to put him down and draw up to 3 cards, which is very, very rare. Usually he'll find his way into the discard pile. Misslash is the attack that we want to use. For a watercolors, you can do 130, and it isn't affected by weakness, resistance, or any other effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. That means if we're up against opposing Altaria GX, or if it's a mirror match and they're trying to use Bright Tone against you, you can use this Greninja to misslash through that Bright Tone, which is cool. You can also attack through Keldeo GX, which is the new age version of Hooper. So we don't need to have any non-GX attackers in here because we can just spam misslash if ever we see one of those annoying walls. The other Greninja GX has Haze Slash. You can do 110, and you're allowed to shuffle the Pokemon and all cards attached to it back into your deck, which is a lot less of a cost when you're just a basic and you already have Welder to do some extra attachments throughout the game. So if you're receiving damage, again, this is like mainly in non-GX kind of matchups, you can just try and spam Haze Slash and like Welder onto your next thing or whatnot and tank hits here and there, or just feed your opponent, non-GXs like your Stellarwish Jirachis, as you Haze Slash into the deck and undo some of that damage, which is really awesome. It even has a GX attack option, which can do 130 to one of your opponent's bench, which in some situations is pretty reasonable. We then have the Turbo Strike Solgaleo promo. For 2 colorless, you do 120. That's already pretty nice. That and the Detective Pikachu Greninja, these are some of the ones you want to try and find early if you can, because they just have 2 energy attack costs. So even if you don't Welder by turn 2, you can still be attacking with these guys, which is amazing. And the Solgaleo provides additional energy acceleration. You can attach 2 energy from your discard to one of your bench. So again, when you're trying to do this Haze Slash shenanigans, you're probably going to be mixing and matching between Haze Slash and Turbo Strike to get through non-GX players. Because both of these are going to work in tandem with one another to help spam these attacks. And in general, if you're building up towards the Dragonite GX attack in big one-hit KO matchups, maybe a Turbo Strike could help you get closer, whilst also maybe knocking out an early non-GX threat. You know, things like opposing Jirachis or opposing evolving basics, stuff like that. It can be pretty nice. And Dragonite GX, as just mentioned, he is the big beat stick. We are also getting him in the new set. Sky Judgment for 5 colorless does 270, and you discard 3 energy from this Pokemon. It may seem like a pipe dream to try and get 5 energies on board, but, you know, with Welder, it's pretty reasonable. Remember trying to get Double Blaze to do the full 300 damage. That's pretty much the same thing we're looking for here, this time with 5 energy attachments. And we also have the Turbo Strike to help us get there as well. Usually, it's only going to require like 1 of these in the entire game. It can oftentimes just be our finishing attack, but that just gets through, you know, pretty much every tag team, which is awesome. We still have those 2 Reshizards. We can also, of course, copy his attacks. Outrage is always good when you're taking damage on something with 270 hit points. Flare Strike, still just a good vanilla 230 damage output with very limited drawback is great. And Double Blaze is still an option that we can try and go for on turn 1 with Welder attached, which is amazing. And as mentioned earlier, we are, of course, Psychic weak with Mew and Mewtwo. We do have Jirachi GX to undo that weakness, but if we're up against heavy Psychic-based builds, they'll probably try and target your Jirachi. So the idea probably is going to try and main the Reshizard in that matchup, and pretty much cosplay as just a pure Reshizard deck if you're facing anything like that, because it's much harder for them to get through the Reshizards themselves. So we always have that fallback plan if we need to for some good type coverage. A couple Dedenne is a great way that we can bin some of these GXs if they do come into our hand, as well as drawing us extra cards. Dedenne is so integral post-rotation because we have Cherish Ball, so it's a very nice searchable draw option, which is amazing. We're going to have 4 Stellar Wish Jirachi. It's great when we're trying to Haze Slash into stuff and just feed non-GXs our opponent's way. It's great as an opening lead just to get extra consistency and digging towards our supporters, namely Welder being one of the most key ones. It's always just great to set up behind this. It can help us late game. If we're going to get hit with reset stamps, it can Stellar Wish us back into good shape. Trying to find things like custom catcher combos throughout the game is always great as well. So Stellar Wish still a fantastic option in the post-rotation format. I was initially skeptical at how powerful Jirachi was, seeing as though Guzma was leaving. But honestly, it's still just a very, very good ability. I think it's still going to be, you know, the front man in many lists because it's still very powerful. That Psychic Zone Jirachi is here mainly just to undo the weakness that we would have against Psychic Pokemon to help the Mew and Mewtwo tank, which is always nice. It does have a couple attacks that you might want to just sneak in here and there. If you just happen to start the Jirachi GX, you can use Star Search to... oh no, it actually can't work in this deck because we don't play any basic Psychics. But you could still use Star Shield if you randomly get 3 Rainbow Energies attached to you. It essentially does 100 and prevent all damage done to this Pokemon during your next turn. That could be really insane on the Mew and Mewtwo, but it's very rare because we only play 4 Rainbows in here. And then finally we play 1 Bench Barrier Mew. I am respecting Pika-Rom. I think it's one of the decks that can draw the best post-rotation because it has Radar, Cherish Ball, and Volkner. It can still get its strategy off very often. So I'm definitely expecting Pikachu and Zekrom to be one of the more powerful decks, and I don't want them to have the value of a huge Tag Bolt knocking out either Jirachi or Dedenne. Those oftentimes are easy prizes for them to sweep up, and we usually have to Dedenne pretty much every game. So the Bench Barrier is going to help out against exactly the Pika-Rom matchup. It's also nice against Beast Box, so they can't, again, do the same thing at sniping Dedenne, stuff like that. So I think Mew's a very relevant card post-rotation for those 2 core decks, and it's going to make your matchup a little bit better. Onto the trainers, we have 2 Switch and 2 Escape Board. It's a small package with the Jirachi. We don't like spam it every single game, but remember Guzma is no longer a factor, so those 1 or 2 Jirachis that started off on the board, they'll pretty much finish the game still in play. So keeping your escape boards is very easy, and the switches come in to help out against some status conditions that we could get hit with by, you know, confusion from a Blown or paralysis from a Raichu, stuff like that can be nice. So having Switch and a skateboard can help us out in those instances, as well as, of course, with the Jirachi synergy. A couple Fire Crystal to reload our Fire Energies to help out with Welders and whatnot. Also, we discard energies via Dragonite's attack in certain situations, so getting those back to get extra attachments is great. 3 Acro Bike, I really wanted to have 4, but we had to make space for so many individual Pokemon that I'm going to have to go down to 3. 4 Custom Catcher, the new means of gusting in the format. It's either this or Ninetales or Victory Bell. Those are the 3 options. So we're going to stick with Custom Catchers in here to have like a full-on basic setup. And again, the amount of spaces that are taken up by those 5 random GXs that are used to help the Mewtwo out does obviously eat up space and make us go down this big discarding route. So we don't really have space for things like Ninetales in my book. 4 Cherish Ball is the lifeblood of the deck. It gets us into Dedenne. It gets us into all of these tech Pokemon that we can start discarding via things like Giant Furnace or with Dedenne once again. And it obviously gets us into our main attackers, the Mewtwo and the Reshiram. 2 Giant Furnace. This is an amazing new stadium from the new set. I'm not sure on the translation. It's called all sorts of different things. It's called like Giant Furnace, Giant Oven, Giant Stove, Big Oven, and etc, etc. But regardless, this is like a Viridian Forest +1. You're able to discard 1 from hand and go ahead and grab 2 fire energy. Obviously immense when you're playing with basic fires and trying to welder and whatnot. This is just amazing value. And then we're going to have 1 Heat Factory Prism Star. Again, just a great card to have in any like fire deck, giving us additional draw options, and that's always a nice deal. Onto the supporters, we're going to play 3 copies of Cynthia for some shuffle draw, hand refresh, 3 copies of the new Hapu supporter. You get to look at the top 6, choose 2 of them and put the rest into the discard pile. So you're discarding 4 cards, the intention being that you can easily and very, very happily throw away all of these tech GX Pokemon if ever they're in the top 6, whilst also digging deep towards some combo pieces, maybe some custom catchers, maybe fire crystals, maybe stadiums, whatever else. The Hapu is going to help us dig towards those sorts of options, whilst also thinning out the deck for us. We have a lot of excess stuff in the deck. We have excess Jirachis, all those Pokemon that want to hit the discard pile. And yeah, really, we're just trying to dig towards rainbows and all that good stuff. And then we have the 4 Welders. Welder is, again, just a really important card. He's our accelerator, whilst also drawing us cards at the same time. So what's not to like? It's an awesome 4 of that we build around, basically. Onto the energy, I've mentioned Rainbow a couple times, but yeah, we are going to play the 4 copies. It allows us to use the Altaria and the 2 Greninjas. Everything else attacks for colorless. We know that we can always just copy a Reshiram as well if we're not able to find these rainbow energies, so that's always fine. And the 8 fire, I think with the furnaces to dig them out pretty easily. The fire crystals, it's never too much of an issue. So here's the full list. Pause now if you want to take a note. It'll also be in the description down below as well. But here are some tech options. Obviously, the list is endless when you're talking about Mew and Mewtwo. I've just really scratched the surface, but I believe I've taken the best 5 that you can put in. The very close 6th is the Latios GX that you can see here. Tag Purge does 120, and you prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by tag teams. So it's like an upgraded version of the Altaria. Altaria only does 50, but it's all the GXs, whereas this is much more relevant damage, 120. But it only shuts off tag teams. The reason why I've put the Altaria in over this card is because I think most people have some like non-tag team attacking presences, and the Altaria sort of covers more bases, but Latios is much more relevant math. So if you want to add him in, he could be nice. And of course, he's a basic as well, so you can simply bench him, attach a Rainbow and Welder onto him. If you have that full amount of Pokemon in play, you can still attack with this guy if you really need to. So he could be another include to the deck. He also has free retreat, which is insane. We then have Great Potion and Choice Helmet if you want to be more of a tanking archetype. We do have that Greninja to sort of shuffle ourselves back in, but it's not something we can do all that often because we still need to like find more Rainbow Energies and keep weldering and whatnot, and we're limited to the amount of times we can actually do that in a game. So possibly adding in some heal or something like a Choice Helmet could be nice in mirror match situations, so you don't get one shot by opposing Mewtwo's copying a Dragonite GX attack, which is pretty funny. If you're not happy with the Rainbow build, you could try Viridian Forest and then add in, like a couple Water and a couple Fairy, I guess. But that's a little bit kind of clunky in my book. I prefer the option of Giant Furnace. I think it's just a far stronger card. If you want to add in some more non-GX threats, there's obviously Volcanion you could try and add in. Again, like if you miss Welder or whatever, you can still Flare Starter going second, which is still fine. The only issue is you don't have much search for this card anymore. High Heat Blast is reasonable math for knocking out non-GXs, but once again, it's just one of these cards that we used to be able to just Nest Ball for and get out early, but now that's not so much the case. Oranguru could be added in if you're scared about the Shedinja matchup. Oranguru simply recovering things like Custom Catcher could make you have a much better time there. And in general, when you're using Hapu as aggressively as you can in this deck, you may end up discarding some painful things. Again, Custom Catchers are the main one that comes to mind. If you run out of Gusting, it can really be a problem for you, so possibly adding in the Oranguru could be nice. Heatran GX is an option. Burning Road can be, again, like this GX attacker. It's really in here. Like, the main reason I thought about adding in this card is if you get hit with someone else using a Latios GX, you could then steal all those energies, take them off the Mewtwo, and just attack with Heatran instead. Also, 3 for 130 with no negative downside is good against non-GX once again. So if you want to put him in just as another option to steal with Mewtwo, or something that can come into the active against things like Latios GX, could be pretty cool, because its GX attack can still take one-hit KOs. And then there's the option of going down the sort of Ninetales and Salazzle route. If you want to add in more stage 1s, add in Pokecoms and all that good stuff, it could be an alternative route for you. If you're not a fan of the custom catchers, if you're worried about Hapu getting rid of them, you could try and weave in the Ninetales line to have Gust in that direction instead. You'd probably need to add in more Fire Crystals and stuff to supplement it. And the list would end up changing quite a bit, to be honest. But if you want to go down the Ninetales route, you effectively have more Gusts available to you, and it's more sort of like accessible, I guess, because whenever you have Big Oven in play, or whenever you find a Fire Crystal, that's an easy way to Gust. Whereas trying to dig out these custom catchers isn't always easy. So you may want to try out a Nine Temptations Roast Reveal type strategy. The only thing that's not in the list right now as well, which you may have noticed, is Reset Stamp. I'm actually playing 0 copies of Stamp right now. I think Mewtwo is one of these decks that has so many tech cards that you want to simplify it as much as possible and just force your own strategy on the opponent. But I could definitely see the reason of adding in like 1 or 2 Reset Stamps to ruin custom catcher combos and just, hurt your opponent's hand size, really. So adding in 1 or 2 Reset Stamps is obviously not a bad decision. I think this deck is overall quite aggressive. And I think aggressive decks usually will play like 1 or no copies from my testing, because you'd rather stamp proof yourself rather than have multiple options to lower your opponent's hand size. So I think 2 would be my absolute maximum for Reset Stamp in this list, especially because our item count is it's pretty streamlined and straightforward. There's not too much wiggle room in my book, outside of maybe chopping into some of these tech Pokemon. Maybe you don't think the Solgaleo is worth it or whatever. You could try going around that route and adding in Reset Stamps, but I would really probably only try and make room for 1, if any, because it's still good at hurting your opponent on like a crucial turn, but at the same time, you're the one trying to be the aggressor, and you have so many attacks that can deal with different situations. It's going to be the attacking choice that is probably going to be more impactful on your opponent's side of the field than them having a lower hand size. That's just my own opinion, but the Reset Stamp is still obviously a phenomenal card, and it just happens to be not in the first deck that I profile, but it's in pretty much all the other decks that I'm going to be doing for the new format. So yeah. Onto the matchup overview. I think Beast Box is one of the scarier ones. Obviously, the Psychic Naganadel hits you for weakness. Yes, you have Jirachi, but they do hit 120 with Beast Raid, and 120 plus a spell tag at any point in the game means they can gust up a Jirachi and knock it out if they've spell tagged you at some point in the game. They obviously also have the Stinger GX attack option, which means they only need to knock out 1 tag team to win the game. So they can try and set up some shenanigans there, which I think is the biggest worry for any tag team deck, really. We saw how Stinger GX in Zoroark Persian was so successful at the NAIC, and the Beast Box, I believe, is going to try and take on a similar role, where when it sees tag teams, it's just going to go for Stinger after hitting a tag team once and hoping that's enough to close out the game. There's also Psychic Malamar. I think all the Malamars could be a little bit sketchy. I think the Psychic one in particular, because it will be mainly non-GX, and it's most likely to play Mimikyu as well as higher copies of Spell Tag. I think the other 2 Mallies probably won't play Spell Tag, but the reason why I'm scared about the Psychic Mallie is because if they just start attacking with Giratina, it makes you go towards the Reshizard. Then Reshizard comes in and does a big Flare Strike. They Spell Tag onto you and they put down a Mimikyu, and you're just in bad shape because they one-shot the Reshizard anyway. So the Psychic Mallie probably has the best up trades available out of any of the Malamar lists. So that's the one that's very worrying for Mewtwo, especially because it's mainly non-GX throughout the entire game. Shedinja currently we're not teching for. We probably don't have enough Gust to win that matchup if they set up reasonably consistently. So if you want to add in techs, you obviously can. I'm always going to put out vanilla baselines, and some decks will naturally have answers to Shedinja, some won't. But if you want to tech for Shedinja for Worlds, that's obviously something you can be doing. Nidoqueen, I've not been able to make work just yet, so I'm not a huge... I don't think it's a huge problem that it's got a potentially like bad matchup on paper, because Nidoqueen on paper is something very different to Nidoqueen in reality, so that might be a deck that's just not really a deck, so I wouldn't be too worried about that bad matchup in theory. Spiritomb Beasts could be a little bit awkward. They're, again, non-GXs that can reach to pretty good numbers. They have things like Nihilego that, again, can have like type coverage against you. Spiritomb can feast on things like Dedenne and your Jirachi GX as well for easy prizes for them, so that's a bit of a worry. And the last one is the new Aegislash Stage 2 deck that will just be recycling itself, smacking 130 every turn, and again, if they play things like Power Plant and spell tags and whatnot, it's going to get rough for you. Again, they hit 130. If they can just spell tag a Jirachi at some point, then gust it up with custom catchers, then the Mewtwo's are like fresh meat for them. So that's a real issue and something you have to work around. So overall, let's have a look at my closing thoughts. It's clearly a very powerful card. We have lots of versatility here, so many options. I think you definitely want to see GX-based decks, because you can either wall them out with Altaria or just one-bomb them with a combination of Reshiram and Dragonite, which is really awesome. I do think there's a bit of a small concern about possibly prizing some key one-off GXs in certain matchups, or just getting them in the discard pile in some cases. Maybe you can't fish them out very easily. Maybe there's not enough discard synergy in the deck to really get rid of them at the right situations. You may end up on turn 2 having to use an attack you don't really want to do that isn't all that effective, just because you've only been able to bin, you know, a certain attacker that isn't the right one that you were trying to hope for. And the other thing to bear in mind is that Power Plant is obviously an issue for this deck. We are very ability focused with the Mew and Mewtwo itself. We do have the Reshiram as a bit of a fallback, but I'm mainly concerned about Psychic decks shutting off Jirachi. Either they're going to custom catch a Jirachi and kill it at some point, and then the Mewtwo is like a dead weight on the board because you can't go into him anymore because he's just so fragile. Or they just Power Plant on a certain turn, shut down our weakness, one-shot our new Mewtwo, and then once again they've gone very far ahead on tempo. So I think Power Plant is definitely the thing you have to be worried about with this deck. We're currently only playing 3 Stadium cards. You may want to up that to 4 just to make sure you have a bounce even more frequently. But I think it should be relatively obvious what decks will be playing Power Plant against you. So once you see those sorts of archetypes, possibly leaning more towards the Reshiram's the safer play overall. So let me know what you guys think about this list and everything else to do with Unified Minds. Let me know what decks you want to see next. Obviously, some of the ones on that sort of matchup overview will be the ones that sort of I have on my radar for Worlds. So if there's anything that's not on the list, I will happily hear you out on the reasons why I should put it on there and then start discussing it. So yeah, hope you enjoyed the first of many Unified Minds deck analysis. They're going to be PowerPoints until August, because we don't get the set on PTCGO until then, unfortunately. So hope you put up with these for a little while, and I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for another video. Cheers.